Mouthwashing is a game that has grabbed plenty of positive attention since its release in 2024. The game's potent psychological horror, interesting storytelling, and thought-provoking use of symbolism makes it both memorable and fascinating. It's one of those things that's impossible not to talk about once you've played it. One often talked about aspect of the game is the characters. Even if they seem simple near the beginning, by the end of the game they feel like real people, and all of the horror that entails. The game is intentionally disturbing for many reasons, but the characterization of Curly and Jimmy really got its hooks in me. They are disturbingly realistic portrayals of people who struggle to take responsibility for their actions, and other people's actions that they could have prevented. One of them learns a very harrowing and challenging lesson about how the people you care about can turn out to be truly heinous, and the other one would literally rather die than learn anything. I want to cut these two open and really look at how their stories mirror everyday real-world scenarios, because they've been living in my head rent-free ever since I found out about this game. If you have not played Mouthwashing, I highly recommend it. It can usually be finished in a few hours and is very narratively fulfilling. But if you haven't played it and want to keep watching this video, I will provide a brief summary of events just so we all know what's going on. Spoilers included, obviously. Okay, so here's what happens in Mouthwashing. A spaceship carrying 5 crew members has crash-landed, and we follow a non-linear telling of events that cuts between the time before the crash and the time after the crash. Before the crash, we are in the first-person perspective of Captain Curly, a friendly man who's been friends with the co-pilot for a long time. After the crash, we are in the first-person perspective of Jimmy, the co-pilot who is clearly feeling some pressure and seems to have a shorter fuse. Curly was injured in the crash, rendering him immobile, mute, and in excruciating pain. He was found in the cockpit, so the crew assumes that he crashed the ship on purpose. We find out that before the crash, the crew had just found out that they had been fired as the company they work for is going bust, and Jimmy resents that Curly is the only one among them who can easily find a new career. The nurse, Anya, often seems to be upset and nervous, especially around Jimmy. The 2 remaining crew members are the young and silly Daisuke and the old and cynical Swansea. Jimmy is forced to give Curly pain meds as Anya is too disturbed by the pain feeding them to Curly causes him. And Jimmy seems to use this as a way to take out frustration on Curly. While it is not shown, there is even a scene where it sounds like Jimmy is beating him up. Things take a psychological horror turn as the crew discovers they've been transporting mouthwash and drink the alcoholic substance as they start to run out of supplies. In particular, Jimmy starts tripping out and thinking about hurting Curly. Before the crash, Anya asked Curly why there are no locks on the sleeping quarters even though there are locks on the medical room, and Curly naively replies that the reason is safety. After the crash, Anya has locked herself in the medical room with Curly. Jimmy is worried for Curly's safety and convinces Daisuke to help him sneak past Swansea so they can climb in through a shattered vent. In the utility room, they discover that only one cryopod survived the crash, and Jimmy theorizes that Swansea was hiding it so he could escape after everyone else was dead. Jimmy manipulates Daisuke into crawling through the busted vent even though they both know it is very dangerous. Daisuke makes it to the other side but is mortally wounded in the process. They do not have enough medical supplies left to help him, so Swansea puts Daisuke out of his misery. Before the crash, we see that Anya told Curly she was pregnant, with the implication being that Jimmy assaulted her, and the pregnancy is the result of that. She has hidden the onboard gun because she knows Curly won't let her use it to protect herself, and she doesn't want Jimmy to find it. After the crash, Jimmy finds the gun under Curly's medical bed, and Curly starts laughing through his pain upon seeing Jimmy hold it. It's revealed that Jimmy planned the crash after being confronted with Anya's pregnancy. He told Curly that they would both go down as villains if this story ever got out, and that it would be preferable, to him, for this story to end in tragedy. Jimmy says he'll take care of it, and Curly watches him walk away. After the crash, Anya's dead body is found in the med room. She has taken pills. Swansea tries to kill Jimmy after realizing how dangerous he is, but Jimmy shoots him first. But not before Swansea gives one of the best monologues ever written about how he feels like his life has been a horrible waste. But at least he's not like Jimmy, who can never see himself for the monster he truly is. Jimmy has a psychological freakout about being watched. He hurts Curly even further. He thinks about the pregnancy. Curly takes responsibility because he knows he could have stopped this. At the end of all of that, Jimmy apologizes to Curly, says he can still fix it, and says they can still make it. He apologizes to Curly and only Curly. Jimmy is confronted by a specter of the company they worked for, and it asks that if all of his apologies are genuine, and all of his alleged desire to now take responsibility is real, then, quote, why are you still so concerned about him? This is one of the only voiced lines in the game. Jimmy takes Curly's mangled, but alive, body and puts it in the last cryopod. He's saved Curly, and in his own mind, he's a hero. I've fixed this, he says to Curly, before starting the cryopod. Jimmy leaves the screen and a gunshot is heard. The game ends. I think it's very thematically important that the characters we are seeing from the perspective of are Curly and Jimmy, the two parties guilty of the most destruction either directly or indirectly. It puts the player in an uncomfortable position that just gets more and more uncomfortable as more information is revealed. Let's talk about the perspective of Curly, because of the two POV characters, I think he's more relatable to most people. Curly's characterization in the early game is extremely important, because he is nice to everyone, including Anya and including Jimmy. Compared to Jimmy's abrasive attitude, he seems almost like a saint, and I think that's what makes the reveals in the second half of the game so impactful. Anya has some key lines of dialogue, like saying, I told you, when Curly asks how she got pregnant, and her claiming she knows Curly wouldn't give her anything she could use to defend herself. The implication is that she, at the very least, told Curly she didn't feel safe around Jimmy, though it's not entirely clear if she told him the details of the event. Even once it's abundantly clear that Curly knows everything, knows what Jimmy did to Anya, knows that Jimmy is dangerous, he still wants to jump to his defense. He says, we can fix this, to him. He lets him go even though Jimmy basically just admitted that the ship crashing and everyone dying would be a good thing for him. This is what I mean about the terrifying nuance this game is written with, because while it is easy and necessary to judge Curly for letting it get this out of hand, it is also disturbingly easy to understand his perspective. Curly is kind, but forgiving to a fault, and his emotional bond with Jimmy makes it really fucking hard for him to turn on Jimmy. I feel like I see people like Curly all of the time. I feel like I've been Curly before to a slightly less dramatic extent. Like, far in my past, I've been the one hearing about a friend of mine doing terrible things and just not being able to process it at first. How could that be? Is the internal conversation. That's not what that person's like around me. It's really tough music to face, but it's also necessary. Within the past decade, there's been an increasing rise of hate movements in North America, and sometimes you'll hear about people who have lost friends who have fallen down the hate pipeline. It's sad and upsetting, but what's even more sad and upsetting is people who have lost friends down the hate pipeline, but refuse to actually lose them, and refuse to save them. What I mean by that is, I've heard a lot of people saying stuff like, oh yeah, this person believes in this form of bigotry or in this form of horrifying violence, but you know, they're still a nice person even though they believe those things. And I'm going to talk a lot in this video later about how people who do horrible things obviously aren't born horrible and aren't some different type of bad person. People are people, and it's important to see the humanity in even the worst people. But there's an extremely meaningful difference between seeing someone's humanity and being complicit. Lightly disapproving of your friend's harmful actions isn't going to make the world a better place if you continue to play defense for them in such a way that allows them to perpetuate that harm. Curly learned that in the most difficult way possible. He found himself the victim of Jimmy's violence after he was horrifically injured in Jimmy's planned crash. Tale as old as time. The scene of Curly fully and completely realizing how right Anya was when Jimmy finds the gun is going to be playing in my head possibly forever. Like I said, I've been Curly. I've met Curly. Hell, I've probably met some Jimmys without even being aware of it, and that is an intense emotion to explore. There's a very striking motif in the game, and that is Curly's exposed eye. His entire body is either covered by bandages or burnt so badly it no longer resembles human flesh, but his one eye is always wide open. I think the reason so much attention is drawn to it is because it is both Curly's crime and punishment. He was told to some extent that Jimmy was dangerous by Anya, and he heard Jimmy's unhinged ramblings about how this scenario would go away if it ended with tragedy, and he just observes. He doesn't do anything about the red flags being waved in front of his face. He just watches as things get worse. After the crash, now that he has become a victim of Jimmy's actions, he has all of this information. Jimmy crashed the ship. Jimmy assaulted Anya. You need to protect yourself from Jimmy, but he can't say anything. Again, he just watches as things get worse, but this time it's not of his own volition. To transition into our talk about Jimmy, I want to go back to something I said earlier. The whole, they must be a nice person because they're nice to me mentality. It's important here because it's the exact same philosophy Jimmy uses to convince himself that he's been redeemed, just turned inward. In other words, he only thinks about his redemption through how he treats Curly. Jimmy has hurt and or killed every single person aboard this ship, but at the end, all of his apologies and remorse are directed towards Curly in specific. That's why the horse mascot calls him out for only being concerned about him being Curly. Even before his apologies, he's focused on Curly to a point where it actually hurts the other crew members. Anya had been showing some pretty serious red flags, but when she locks herself in medical, Jimmy's focus is on Curly, on saving Curly from Anya. He has Daisuke go into a broken and electrified event, even though he knows it's dangerous as fuck, because he's more worried about Curly. The thing about Jimmy is that he, either consciously or subconsciously, doesn't recognize the humanity in his other crewmates. This is also something very real that I see a lot of real-life people use to overcome cognitive dissonance. I must be a nice person because I treat people nicely. Just don't pay attention to how I treat this other group of people. That doesn't count. Once again, my brain jumps to the recent rise of hate groups and how people cling to every positive thing they've ever done as a justification for them to be hateful towards anyone that doesn't fall under their umbrella of humanity. It's not much of a moral philosophy if certain groups are excluded from it. Even the worst people out there are nice to people they like. The elephant in the room, or rather the talking horse mascot in the room, is Anya. Jimmy's mistreatment of her is the catalyst for every single disaster that happens afterwards, and his refusal to take responsibility for that mistreatment is what got the person he does care about, Curly, hurt. But it doesn't come up to him. He has all of these visions about hurting Curly and running away from representations of the unborn child, but not Anya. In fact, there's a part of the game where he very deliberately doesn't perceive Anya. He goes into the med room after she's ended her own life, and his psyche blurs out that part of the room. Part of this visual obstruction is for dramatic effect, for the player's benefit, but it doubles as a piece of Jimmy's perspective, of his refusal to take any responsibility for her death. There's a phrase that's repeated throughout the game. Our worst moments don't make us monsters. Jimmy uses that one while talking to the horse mascot before he's cut off. In fairness, I also believe this statement to be true, but in a very different way than how Jimmy is interpreting it. Our worst moments don't make us monsters, not because every transgression is forgivable, but because there is nothing separating those perceived as monsters from regular people. Another psychological mechanism people use to keep their own self-image morally just is to view bad people as some sort of separate type of people, a group that they simply do not belong to. I am not a bad person because I'm not one of those people. This is another factor that makes Jimmy's story uncomfortably realistic. The thing is, there is no separate type of person that are the bad guys. Perfectly normal people are capable of doing monstrous things. People are capable of changing for the better and for the worse. That's what makes being a curly so gut-wrenching. Watching someone you know is capable of good go down a harmful path, one on which you cannot follow. That's why it's important to recognize the humanity of people you hate. Because if you don't, you are creating a mental barrier that protects yourself from self-reflection, from the ability to recognize the harmful parts of your own personality. I'm going to bring up something I brought up in my Has Been Hotel video. And yes, I'm aware that it's deranged to bring up fucking Has Been Hotel in a mouthwashing video, but let me cook. In that video, I stated that anyone can be redeemed. Not everyone will be redeemed, and even if someone is redeemed, you don't have to forgive them. Jimmy is someone who will never be redeemed, and that is by his own choice. After doing one sort of heroic thing at the end, Jimmy ends his own life. This way, he never has to face consequences for anything he did to his crewmates. He never has to take responsibility. There is another guilty party among the crew. Another entity that made things worse, and that is Pony Express, the company that owns the ship. While Curly and Jimmy dodge responsibility for their own emotional convenience, Pony Express is using deliberate obfuscation to distract from the fact that they are a bad company. They have a cute mascot and all of these little flyers with safety and work tips on them. And they also get rid of employees with no severance pay, don't provide locks for sleeping quarters, and are extremely cutthroat about how much pay and work the crew are expected to make and do respectively. Pony Express also makes the Tulpar situation worse by creating such a drastic power imbalance between the crew and the captain. The captain is the only one with access to certain supplies, including weapons. Once Jimmy becomes captain, he also gains access to those privileges. This implies that either A, Pony Express assume whoever's in the captain position will always be responsible, which is naive, or B, Pony Express doesn't really give a fuck about the crew beyond the person who is in charge. They have some level of responsibility to make sure their crew is in a safe work environment, and they did an amazingly bad job at that. This could have been a very different story if they just included locks on the sleeping quarters. This game offers a lot of food for thought. I've both played it and watched many other people play it on YouTube, and watching people go through this game is consistently fascinating to me. I love noticing what other people pick up on, how they interpret certain pieces of dialogue, and how their feelings on their characters change throughout the narrative. The game ends rather abruptly, with Jimmy ending his life off-screen and Curly's cryopod starting to freeze while the credits play over it. It doesn't have a nicely wrapped conclusion, and it doesn't spoon-feed you the moral of the story. You're kind of just left there in space after watching this whole scenario unfold, and you have to unpack your own feelings. Maybe this video essay is kind of the same way. If you enjoyed this video, please let the algorithm know by liking, subscribing, or commenting. As I am a small channel, engagement helps a lot, and it does not go unnoticed, nor does it go unappreciated. Check out some of my other videos if you're interested, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!